Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good morning Instagram fam, friends and followers of as-Saafiy, and welcome to another episode of Revert Reflections. And today, as we prepare to close out the week, I thought that we would take a closer look at the Hadith of Nu'man ibn Bashir, collected by Bukhari and Muslim. And that is the hadith we mentioned on the first day of this week. And that is the hadith which begins, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيِّنْ وَإِنَّ الْحَرَامَ بَيِّنْ وَبَيْنَهُمَا أُمُورٌ مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ. Indeed, the lawful is clear, and the unlawful is clear, and between them there are matters which are dubious, matters which are doubtful. طيب. So the Prophet begins by telling us al-halal bayyin wal-haram bayyin. That which is lawful is clear, and that which is unlawful is clear. And what that means is that it's clear to most people and to the scholars, to the people of sound and thorough and comprehensive Islamic knowledge. And then he goes on, he says, وَبَيْنَهُمَا أُمُورٌ مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ. And he says, and between the two of them are doubtful matters, whose ruling, when he says doubtful, he's basically saying that the ruling, whether halal or haram, is not entirely clear, or it is in question. And then he goes on to say, لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس. He says that the ruling of these dubious matters, many people do not know. And what he's saying there, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or what he's indicating, is that the absence of knowledge, عدم العلم ليس علما بالعدم. The absence of knowledge is not knowledge of absence, or definitive knowledge one way or the other. So it should not be said, it's not haram, I can do this because it's not haram. It's not haram, so I can do it until someone proves to me that I can't. We shouldn't say that when it comes to what? To these doubtful matters. Rather, one should avoid these doubtful matters rather than assert that they must be lawful, because if they were illegal, their illegality would have been clarified or would have been pointed out in religious texts. There are some issues that are just simply doubtful, or the knowledge regarding them is there, but it's elusive. It's something which it takes some expertise to unearth it or to discover it. And so the average layman might not be aware of it, and therefore the average layman cannot just say, hey, it's not haram, you got to show me, you got to prove to me it's haram. If that average layman has doubt, if it's a doubt for a dubious matter, and there is reason to believe that it's illegal, that person should avoid it. And that's what the Prophet meant when he said, فَمَنِ اتَّقَى الشُّبُهَاتِ اسْتَبْرَأَ لِدِينِهِ وَعِرْضِهِ. He said, thus he who avoids doubtful matters thereby safeguards his religion and his good reputation. And the indication here is that Muslims, when it comes to matters which are dubious and the knowledge of their exact ruling is elusive, Muslims are encouraged, nay expected, to err on the side of caution and abstain, fearing the potential harm that it could cause to their religion, by doing something that is haram without realizing it. And obviously when we do something haram, that's a sin, and whenever we do a sin, a black dot appears upon our heart, and the more black dots we get, the darker our heart becomes, and the more reluctant and resistant it becomes to guidance. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَلَّا بَلْ رَانَ عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ مَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. Nay, indeed, there is a rust or a covering or a stain on their hearts because of what they used to do. And B, we have to be concerned about our reputations. By doing something that others recognize because they have more knowledge than us, or because they've asked about this and been taught by those who are learned, they recognize this thing that we consider doubtful or simply questionable, they recognize it as haram. And as a result of us doing this thing that they recognize as haram, they view us as immoral, as corrupt, as depraved, as irreligious. Our fellow Muslims will look at us in this way because as far as they know, because they have more knowledge than we have about this particular thing, they realize that we're doing something haram, which we only consider to be questionable, and therefore our fellow Muslims look at us as irreligious or corrupt or depraved. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet goes on to say, وَمَنْ وَقَعَ فِي الشُّبُهَاتِ وَقَعَ فِي الْحَرَامِ. He says, while he who falls into doubtful matters falls into that which is unlawful. And what the Prophet means is either he falls into that which is unlawful eventually, because doing the questionable but unlawful is a stepping stone toward actually committing the unlawful. That basically, what stands between us and doing the unlawful? The questionable things. Once we traverse the hurdles of the questionable things, we end up landing what? In the place of illegality. And so what stands between us and that is what? Is the doubtful things. And so once we start doing one doubtful thing, another doubtful thing, pretty soon we end up doing the haram things. Eventually is what the Prophet is saying. He could also be saying that we end up actually doing something unlawful unwittingly, because we merely deem the act doubtful, but it's actually illegal. We just don't realize, because of our lack of knowledge, that it's illegal. And this is what the Prophet meant when he said, like the shepherd, karra'i yar'a hawla al-hima, yushik and yarta'afi. Like the shepherd who pastures near a forbidden sanctuary, all but grazing therein. Soon he will unwittingly graze therein. Like a shepherd who does the doubtful things, pretty soon he's doing the haram things without realizing it. Then the Prophet goes on and says, every king, truly every king has a forbidden sanctuary. And truly Allah's forbidden sanctuary is his prohibitions. So just as one should distance himself from the forbidden sanctuary of a worldly king, he should distance himself from the prohibitions of the king of the world. This is what the Prophet is basically telling us in this very wise way. He's saying, just think about it. If you were in this world and there was this king who had so much power and so much authority, he could, if you did something wrong, if you crossed him, he could throw you in jail. He could have you fined some, enormous fine. He could have you executed. If you knew that and you saw a sign that said, this is such and such king's territory, no trespassing, forbidden territory, you would be as far away from it as possible. The Prophet is saying, if you give this type of respect and reverence to a worldly king that you fear, you should give even more reverence and respect to the king of the worlds. Then he goes on and he says, "Ala fil jasadi mudghah," and really, this is the heart of the hadith. And there's a pun intended by me saying that. This is the heart of the hadith, and the part of the hadith that every Muslim should pay attention to and contemplate. The Prophet says, "Ala fil jasadi mudghah, إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب." He says, truly in the body there is a morsel of flesh, which if it is good, if it is pure, the entire body, meaning one's actions, will be good and pure. And if it is diseased, if it is corrupt, the entire body, meaning one's actions, will be corrupt. Truly, that morsel of flesh is the heart. So basically what the Prophet is saying, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam, and it's very important for Muslims to pay attention to, is that when we incline toward illicit behaviors and desire to do questionable things, hiding behind the doubt surrounding their religious ruling, and using that doubt as a justification to engage in these questionable activities, that says something. The Prophet is saying that says something about us and about our hearts. About these hearts which are beating in our chest and which are the most important spiritual organ. That basically the Prophet is saying that says something about you, O believer. You have to realize that. You have to realize it's just like, for example, there are symptoms of diseases of the body, right? So a person says if you're experiencing this, and this, you probably have COVID, right? And you should go get checked. There's cause for concern. There's cause for alarm. The Prophet is saying, if you have this inclination toward doing the wrong things, and you go ahead and do them under the guise or justifying doing them because they are just dubious and doubtful, they're not clearly haram. He says there's a cause for concern, there's a cause for alarm, there's something wrong with your heart. We should be concerned that there is corruption in our hearts. And we should be afraid of the spiritual damage that corruption can ultimately cause if it is not checked and if it's allowed to fester. There is no organ, brothers and sisters, in the body with greater spiritual import than the heart. As Abu Hurairah used to say, Al-qalbu huwa al-malik, wal-a'ba junuduhu. فإذا طاب الملك طابت جنوده وإذا خبث الملك خبثت جنوده. Abu Hurairah used to say that the heart is the king and the body are its loyal subjects, its obedient soldiers. If the heart is upright, if it is pure, then the deeds of the soldiers, the limbs, will be upright and pure. And if the heart is corrupt, then the deeds of the obedient soldiers, the limbs, will be corrupt. As our hearts go, so go our bodies. And so when we're doing these wrong things or inclining toward the wrong things, it's a cause for alarm regarding what? Regarding this most important spiritual organ, the heart. So when the Prophet tells us, brothers and sisters, that something is an indication of a diseased heart, we should pay attention, right? Our antennas should go up and we should respond accordingly. How do we respond? By not being the people who say, what? It's not haram. It's not haram. Prove to me it's haram. In order for me to stop doing something which I know is questionable. Brothers and sisters, with that we bring today's session and this week's sessions to a close. And as always, we ask, first and foremost, we ask that you share the content. If you found the content beneficial, if you found it inspiring, if you found it something which jarred your memory and made you remember something that you had forgotten about the deen of Allah, or it made you feel a greater sense of commitment to obeying and worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, certainly there are others who will experience the same experience or feelings that you did. But they can't do that unless they're exposed to the content. So please share with others. Take the link of this little short clip and share it with the people in your contacts in WhatsApp, and send it to a friend who you haven't spoken to in a while and say, hey, I checked this out and I was inspired. Maybe you'll be inspired too. Help us get the message out. Help us continue to spread the message of Islam, pure and simple, al-Islam as-Saafiy. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as always we ask, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless your houses, bless your spouses, bless your children, bless your day, bless your sources of livelihood and income. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shower you with His blessings and surround you with His protection. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.